show that's on fire. Thank God for movies. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni, co-founder and editor at In Between Drafts. And from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a film writer over at CBR. It's Will Ashton.
What up? I missed you.
I always miss you, Will, even when I've just talked to you. I'm like,
wow.
Where'd you go?
Man, that's touching.
You can find more episodes of Thank God for Movies, including our full archive on thankgodformovies.com, including written reviews and other fun features. And of course, if you enjoy what we do, please consider leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps us out, and we very much appreciate it. So today on the show, we're going to talk about 3 movies. We're going to talk about Toy Story 5, The Furious, and Disclosure Day. Reason being, we haven't had a chance to record together in some weeks. Well, I think the last movie we had, on the feed was Scary Movie that I did with, I believe was with Corey. And then before that, what? Am I missing something?
No, Scary Movie was with me.
It was with you? Wait, what did I record with Corey then?
Mandalorian and Grogu?
That must be what it was. Because I did Masters of the Universe with Brogan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, so Scary Movie was with you.
Correct.
Okay, my bad. Well, anyway, point is, it's been, since then, we've had some big releases. We did plan on doing Disclosure Day. We just didn't get to it. The Furious was one that both of us had seen. We were ready to talk about, and yeah, we just couldn't make it happen. But before we dig into those 3 movies, and I want to kind of talk about how those 3 movies have been doing before we dig into each one specifically. There have been some other flicks hitting the scene, and, we had the live-action Moana just come out over this weekend, and we also had Evil Dead Burn. Now, Moana crashed and burned. I didn't bother going to the screening. I was very much like, I don't care. I don't want to. I have no interest. And Evil Dead Burn, I am kind of interested. Reviews have been good. And I think, were you planning on seeing that one? Have you seen it?
Well, as I told you before, I'm seeing it right after this recording.
That's right. Yeah, I was like, I couldn't remember the timing that you laid out. Yeah, so you're going to see that pretty soon, and I'm looking forward to your reaction. The movie, though, that I want to see next, that I have been pushing myself, I really, really want to see. I missed like 2 screenings in a row of it, was The Invite. I really want to see The Invite, the new Olivia Wilde movie with Seth Rogen, Penelope Cruz, and Edward Norton. Is that on your radar? Because I think that could be a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, it's not like a must-see, but I want to check it out. I heard good things. It seemed like the initial reaction out of Sundance was kind of muted, but then since then it's really picked up. It's sort of the opposite of what tends to happen with a lot of Sundance movies, which is like they get a lot of really good acclaim and buzz and sometimes even award consideration at the festival, and then they come out over the summer or something and they fizzle out. But this has been the opposite of that, so I find that intriguing, to be sure.
I think a lot of that comes down to the marketing money that these movies get. A lot of the time, these Sundance movies get a lot of PR during the Sundance time, but then when it comes down to it, because, part of it is like so much money is spent to acquire them that a lot of the time they don't have a lot of money left over for marketing. And so they just don't get a lot of buzz through ads and things like that. But one thing I have noticed for The Invite is that they have been putting some money into the marketing for this for whatever reason. I guess they were able to secure, some kind of nice deal, and that's been working out for them. But I don't know where this movie is going to head to next. I know the reviews have been good, but that's about it. The other movie I was very shocked to see was doing pretty well. I mean, I was expecting it to do well financially, but critically is like a bit of a darling at the moment, is Minions and Monsters. Now, I don't want to watch it. I'm just not into these movies. Similar to Moana, I'm like, I can't bring myself to care. But however, apparently some people they like those Minions, they like those monsters. But I don't think you've seen this one.
No, I want to. I'm softer on the Minions than you are. I don't love them per se, but I find them in the right moments to be appealingly kind of cutesy and fun. I don't think they're high art or anything, but I've been hearing so many wonderful things about this new one. It's a love letter to old cinema, I mean, anything that gets the youth into a trip to the moon and Sherlock Jr. and stuff has to be worthwhile in some respect. So I will check that one out at some point. I will say, for me, I'm not so interested in, as you mentioned, Moana. It just looks like kind of a pointless film. I really like the 2016 one, but, I just don't really see the point of this. It seems like the reviews echo that sentiment. It's just like, why bother? It's like a worse version of Gus Van Sant's Psycho. It's like,
yeah,
who cares?
Well, at least there were 30 years in between.
Right.
Those 2 movies versus this is just 10 years.
And then I think more to do with just, I think, my general fatigue for superhero movies and stuff. I just have had no interest in seeing Supergirl.
Well, I was going to get to Supergirl. I was holding off on that.
I know you saw it. I know you were less enthused by it.
It's my biggest disappointment of the summer. I mean, this is the one that I was really looking forward to and really hoping the best for, and it just let me down and basically almost every respect. The only thing about it that I thought worked was Millie Alcock herself,
That
but
was
everything else, I mean, shoot,
Yeah, I
what a
mean, that was the
misfire.
only thing that was of interest to me about it. I mean, I don't know that much about the Supergirl property compared to Superman. I mean, the original Supergirl movie is awful, so I was open to, a fine remake of it. But knowing that Craig Gillespie was directing it, I'm not really crazy about his recent stuff. His earlier stuff, like Lars and the Real Girl, and
Yeah.
there's something else he did back in the day that I remember liking.
Lars
a
and the
fair
Real
bit.
Girl is one of my favorite examples of how to do the 3-act structure really well, or the 6-act story structure. It's just really well crafted in that respect. But then,
Yeah.
the other stuff, like I wasn't a big fan of I, Tonya, and I liked Cruella more than I thought I would, but I didn't think that movie was nearly as good as, it could have been.
I mean, I wasn't a fan of Cruella. I know you like that one. I like I, Tonya fine. I don't have the same appreciation for it that some folks do. I think it's because, and it was part of the reason I'm not really interested in this movie, is that it seems like, for whatever reason, Craig Gillespie's kind of become less of his own individual filmmaker and more of a like gun for hire who's kind of used to mimic another filmmaker, but on a, cheaper dime. And I feel like, certainly with I, Tonya, I felt like he was like a, C-tier version of Scorsese or even
Yeah.
David O. Russell for that film. I feel like, with Cruella, it seems like he's just kind of just there to do a hot topic punk aesthetics for that film, but not really have like a vision or a style to it. And I feel like I never saw Dumb Money, but I kind of felt like that was a movie that was trying to go for like a Adam McKay kind of Big
Yeah.
Short thing, and it just felt like it was, like what it is, a pache. And so this movie, it just felt like, well, James Gunn's
Pastiche, you mean, right?
Sorry, a pastiche. That's the writer in me. I see words and I know how they're written sometimes, but I never know how they are pronounced, particularly with names, as people know and have pointed out. But yeah, this one, it just seemed like he was there to basically fill in for James Gunn. And I assume he was just too busy making the new Superman and running DC's, branch for Warner Brothers that he couldn't do it himself. And it just seems like it was a misfire. Like, it seems like no one's really happy with it, including the creators, if, Hollywood Reporter speculation is to be believed. So, yeah, it just seemed like it was a bummer all around. So I wasn't really that interested in checking it out. And I didn't.
I don't, yeah. And so you didn't see it, but like from somebody who did watch it and had, was looking had high hopes, like was ready to appreciate it however possible. I think there are two big flaws with it, and the box office shows that. I think one of the big flaws is I don't think this wasn't the right writer. I think the writer they brought in was too green, somebody who didn't have a ton of experience, had never written for a feature before, a former actress, Anna I forget how you pronounce her last name. But I just don't think that she and Gillespie were the right team for this. And I think the flaw here is I think Gunn, while he did a good job with Superman, and I think that he has great instincts as a creator, this is a sign to me like he's not Kevin Feige. Like he is not that kind of like hold the keys to an entire universe / saga of films kind of person. And we've seen that before. J.J. Abrams wasn't able to do it with Star Wars either. Not that he was really allowed to be fair. And so I think this is just that classic case of like they're trying to be Marvel, but it's not so easy. I mean, I think that you need a different kind of recipe for these things to work better. So in this case, I think I don't think Gunn showed the best judgment in who he hired to do this. And I think that was the big issue. And then the other issue too is they're trying to like adapt the Supergirl comic from like a few years ago that I just think doesn't fit at this stage, like in the creative development of this kind of Superman stuff that you're doing. So anyway, not here to review Supergirl. So it went on a little bit there. Other than that, I know you did see Jackass Best and Last, right?
Yeah. And I know you are, for some reason, you're allergic to these movies.
I'm not allergic to them. I just saw the first two. I just felt like after I saw the second one, I thought the second one was really good. And then I don't know. I just felt like I've seen this. Like, I don't know. I know we're about to talk about Toy Story, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, you gave up after the second one, John, in a certain franchise?
Really wanted to, and I knew it was going to be too big of a hill for you to climb for some reason, but I really wanted to do a pairing of this movie, Jackass Best and Last, and Toy Story 5, just because there are very weird similarities to these fifth installments that are coming out about, people who have to kind of begrudgingly sort of grow up and still kind of maintain their childhood at the same time, even down to Johnny Knoxville, kind of got a fitting farewell with the fourth one, but he's kind of being roped back in for this movie. And this one kind of just feels like they're trying to establish a new branch, but also yeah, obviously with the title, like give a last hurrah. And so I don't know. I know some folks have been kind of mixed on this one for understandable reasons. It does feel like there was maybe some Paramount influence as far as like pushing this in theaters. Like it might have been a confluence of different things, like a 25th anniversary special that they delayed a year and made into a film. It might have been like just them trying to maintain their 16 film theatrical plan. But I think for all the movie's flaws, especially it being sort of like a clip show and like a theatrical version of one of the point five films, it is charming. It's just nice to see these guys doing their thing. It's the weakest of the theatrical films, but at the same time, it's fun and sweet in its own weird way. Sweet as any of these gross out prank slapstick movies can be. Not a must see. I think it's perfectly fine to watch it at home, but I had a nice time watching it. It seems like I had more fun watching that than you did watching Supergirl that weekend.
Sounds like it. A couple other quick hits that I just never got a chance to see, either because they weren't playing near me or I couldn't make the screening, whatever it is. Girls Like Girls. I reviewed the album for In Between Drafts that Haley Koko did for the movie, and so I was planning to see the film. Never got a chance to. They did like a screening for it on like on a Friday at like 11 a.m. at one point, and I was like, okay, that's a little random. But then, yeah, it just hasn't been playing in a lot of theaters, but hoping to check it out eventually. I think it kind of showed up, and I think the initial reactions were pretty mixed, and then over time it started to build a little bit more momentum, and it's actually done quite well for an indie feature. Less successful was The Death of Robin Hood. I think that movie kind of came and woof. I mean, critics were pretty on it, and I know audiences were like, what the heck is this? I haven't seen the trailer. I don't know too much about the movie itself, but I've just kind of heard that it's like whatever. It's just like one of those forgettable kind of, A24-ish, aesthetic kind of movies that's trying to do dark things. It's, kind of echoing the Northman and stuff like that, but doesn't really have that same kind of, visual intensity, I guess. But, I didn't never had like super big interest in it, and I didn't think the marketing was that compelling, at least that I came across.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to see it just because I can't remember the guy's name, Michael Savisky.
But yeah, we were just talking about this too. Let me double check.
He directed Pig.
Yeah.
And he did the most recent
Sarnowski, that's right.
Sarnowski, that's it, yes. I was interested just because I think he's, a really strong filmmaker with his debut.
Did you ever see Quiet Place Day One? Because he did that one too, didn't he?
I did. I thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
I feel like it didn't quite meet my expectations, but I also feel like after the first Quiet Place, I haven't really been like as enthused with that franchise just because I feel like maybe they kind of just ran out their welcome maybe. But there's a third one, so, maybe that one will rejuvenate my appreciation for this franchise. But
Sure.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to see it for that reason. Similar to you, I didn't see the trailer. I didn't really see any marketing material outside of the posters. I just feel like for some reason, I don't know if it's a group of people or just like it's like a Peter Pan thing where there's just some people in Hollywood that just love Robin Hood and they just keep trying to make movies about him and everyone just keeps going, no.
Yeah.
For some reason,
thank you. Like Ridley Scott tried it, and then I forget, who did the one with Taron Egerton?
I don't remember.
Where it's like Antifa for some reason.
I don't know.
It's just
everyone is just like, listen, unless it's the animated one, we don't care.
Yeah. Give us the Fox already.
Right.
Yeah. The only other movie I had here on the radar was Leviticus. Also didn't see that, but I saw it. It got good notices. I mean, it's just like, one of those, like, it's just kind of like came and went, critics liked it fine. I actually liked it a decent deal, and then it just didn't have a lot of buzz. It didn't have a lot of marketing, and so it just didn't do much at all. So, I don't know. Could be a cult classic someday.
Yeah, I think this was one of those films that it just kind of came out maybe a little too soon. I think, maybe
it's
they
like
just
caught up, right? In like a very noisy time for horror.
Right. I just feel like maybe they just didn't anticipate Obsession still being in the cultural conversation at this point, as well as Backrooms. Like if this had come out maybe in August or something when it's like less busy in the multiplex and it could kind of stand on its own, I feel like that might have benefited it. Like you said, I just feel like there's just too much noise going around. I feel like this one just kind of got lost in the shuffle. I was interested in it, and I feel like it's already out of theaters. Same with Death of Robin Hood. I just didn't get a chance to see it. But yeah, maybe I'll check it out when it's on streaming in October.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, I mean, the story of the summer, box office-wise, has been Obsession and Backrooms, especially Obsession. I mean, now it's widely considered, or it has basically become like one of the most successful indie films of all time. Made more money. It's made more money than Sinners. It's kind of unbelievable. And I think there's, we could have a whole conversation around what's going on there in terms of, I think a lot of it is Gen Z just really claiming this as like their movie. Like something about this movie has really clicked with a lot of people between the ages of like 18 and 30 in a way that I think we don't see very often. And it's very exciting, but it also, I think, is going to create some Hollywood pencil pushing that you and I are probably not going to be fans of. That said, I do want to pivot, of course, into the movies we're going to review. We're going to review 3 of them, and they each occupy a very interesting place, I think, box office wise. So I kind of want to give you like a bit of a box office snapshot. So we're recording this on July 12th. If we're looking at Toy Story 5 to start, this movie has made $400 million domestically. It's made $879 million worldwide. It's the major blockbuster of the summer. It's going to cross $1 billion. It's number 1 movie of the summer by a pretty decent margin. And I think a lot of people predicted this. A lot of people looked at Toy Story 5 as like, yeah, it's probably going to do well. It's not going to be Lightyear. But I think there were some people who thought, well, is it going to be Lightyear, or is it going to be Inside Out 2? Okay, it has definitely decisively hit the Inside Out 2 angle, right? We'll get into what we think of the actual movie, but I do think like it's interesting to point out, like, this is the largest domestic opening of the franchise, right? Toy Story 4 opened with 120 million. I mean, I guess you could play around with the inflation, and so maybe the gap isn't quite so wide, but this debuted with 160 million, right? And you compare that to Lightyear, right? Lightyear debuted with 50 million box office. What was that? 4 years ago, 2022. And it's just remarkable to me. This thing made $110 million more in its opening weekend. Like that is just wild to me, because like, I don't know. I feel like with Lightyear, I don't understand like what creates that gap, and the worldwide opening was over 300 million. It's the biggest global launch of 2026. I think this movie, as Pixar was hoping, kind of saved them, because I think while Hoppers did well, Elio didn't do very well. And it's just, once again, these legacy sequels just continue to prop up the Pixar kind of brand, keeping them alive basically as best as they can. So that's the big success story.
I will say, as far as Lightyear is concerned, because privately we talked about it a little bit, and I feel like it's one of those things where they never got over the hump of why, I think, with that movie. Like, they announced the film, everyone's confused as to the premise of it and like how it connects to Toy Story. They should have just come up front from the beginning and just said, this is the movie that Andy watched that made him love Buzz Lightyear. But they tried to do some convoluted thing of describing it as the film about the man instead of the toy, or like the exact phrasing escapes me, but it just never came crystallized as like, why do we need this, in a way that, for better or for worse, Toy Story, it has a threshold on generations of people. It feels like these films are kind of integral to people's childhood and to generational storytelling, and it just kind of felt like Lightyear was like the direct-to-DVD movie of Buzz Lightyear that came out in like the 2000s that was, I think, based on the show. It was just kind of just like this offshoot that no one really knew or cared about. And my semi kind of controversial opinion is that I feel like the whole like gay kiss thing was kind of overinflated as like a cause for it, because Pixar and Disney just never wanted to admit that they just had a bad idea and that it was never worth pursuing in the first place. And they just kind of chose that as a scapegoat rather than just facing the fact that they had a movie that I just think inherently no one really understood or cared about.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Well, and that's the thing. I think the big problem with that movie had nothing to do with a bunch of culture war stuff. It was just a boring sci-fi movie. That's all. It was just a boring sci-fi movie. Like, you can get away with the premise being a little convoluted. It's like, oh, the toy? What are you talking about? But if the movie itself had been good, if it had been a good story and it had been funny and engaging and the kinds of things that make like this kind of movie good, I just think it proves that Pixar is not very good at making sci-fi movies in that vein. Like, they did well with WALL-E, but I think that was just a different beast entirely. Speaking of Andrew Stanton, right?
Yeah. They should have just, especially rewatching the Toy Story movies, they should have just basically taken off from the cold opening of Toy Story 2 with like the video game for Buzz Lightyear. It's like campy and silly and goofy and it's like heightened and stuff like that. Like, I just don't know why they couldn't just make a movie like that if they had to make a Lightyear movie about the man, not the toy, or whatever Chris Evans said.
Yeah, I guess they wanted to sell like new toys, or they wanted to appeal to like not young boys, but like preteen boys, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what the thinking really was there.
They underestimated how much the youths love Tim Allen.
I guess that's exactly it. But yeah, speaking of aliens, good position or segue really into Disclosure Day. So, and that's the interesting thing about us talking about these three movies a while after they all come out. We actually have like a good perspective on how these movies have done. And Disclosure Day is an interesting one because it had a good opening, but with mediocre legs, right? So I'm not sure how much you've been following how the movie's been doing over the weeks, right? But this is Steven Spielberg coming back, his latest original alien movie. He's done plenty. And with this one, it opened 44 million domestically, which, it was above the early tracking, which was good. It was the largest opening weekend for an original Spielberg film, also good. So it was looking good for him. The initial worldwide launch was like 93 million. And it just shows you, right, like the differing expectations between this and like, Toy Story 5 obviously doing so much better than this, but, it's relative as all these things are. So yeah, I would say like the opening was pretty encouraging for the most part. I liked Disclosure Day. We'll talk about the movie. So I was kind of thinking, yeah, this might do okay. I think it's going to have a hard hill to climb because it's so long. Because it's honestly, for me, it's an original non-franchise movie. Yeah, it's 145 minutes, but it's also sci-fi. And that was encouraging to me. It's like, oh, this is like one of those, like, yeah, it was pretty, expensive to make, but it kind of has like the bones of like a mid-budget movie in some respects, even though it isn't. So I was like, oh yeah, maybe this is going to do better. Maybe this is going to be a boom for like these original movies getting more traction. Unfortunately, like it dropped off huge. It dropped 60% in the second week. 53% in the third, and it just kept going down and down and down. So yeah, I think that.
Well, yes and no, because you are correct that nationally it's kind of dripping, but weirdly it's had a kind of stronghold from what I can tell internationally. So it's like kind of doing like fine, I think.
I mean, compared to some of its other movies though, because like other Spielberg sci-fi movies have done much better, like in terms,
sure, yeah,
War of the Worlds, even Ready Player One, which was kind of critically panned. I think that. To be fair, we're in a very different theatrical era than movies like Minority Report, for example. However, I think if you wanted to be fair and compare it maybe to something like Arrival or Nope or even like The Creator, I think that those movies, yeah, this is kind of a kind with those. And I think you're right. And I agree with you. Disclosure Day has found a legitimate global audience. It means I think it's like 230 million. And that shows me like, yeah, that internationally people were not indifferent to it. I think the problem, unfortunately, is just the production expenses really have made this an issue because the reported budget's like 115 million. And honestly, I think that they should have tried harder to make this for like 80 million, in my opinion, because it's not that flashy of a movie, right? And it's kind of interesting to me that the budget is this high. And it's not even that A-list of a cast. Like, no disrespect, of course, to Emily Blunt. But, I mean, she's like the biggest name here, right? Like, she and Colin Firth. I think people know Josh O'Connor a little bit, but he's not like a household name or anything. Like, it took me a second to remember his name. Eve Hewson, like, she's getting there, I guess. But, like, she's known for her TV stuff and, like, the trivia question around who her dad is. Not necessarily, like, a recognizable face in that respect. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Coleman Domingo is probably a bigger name than
that's true.
Most of the front leading stars of the film.
Problem for him though is that he kind of has a reputation for kind of showing up, and you never know, like, oh, is this going to be a Ma Rainey's Black Bottom or is this going to be Running Man? Sometimes he shows up in these movies that he's much better than, and so I don't know how much of a pull he has with audiences. But regardless, that's kind of where this thing sits. I think it's a middle ground kind of landing, right? It's too successful to say it's a flop or that audiences rejected it, especially for an original sci-fi, but it's too expensive, I think, as a movie to qualify it as like some kind of financial success. So like, to me, it actually resembles some of the more old-fashioned studio hits from like the olden days that were produced under these kind of like, I think just a different economics that these tentpoles had, where it's like, yeah, enough people showed up, but the movie did need more of them to like really like make it. And that's the other aspect of this too. Did this break any cultural noise? I don't think so. I don't like, I talk to plenty of people come up to me and we talk about movies and stuff. Nobody's talking about Disclosure Day. It has not been disclosed to me, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'll gladly talk about it more when we discuss the actual film, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know. I think it's by and large doing okay. I agree that I think if it was a more reasonably budgeted film, it would be more of a secure hit. I could see this one maybe doing a little bit better on VOD because of the name recognition of Spielberg and just like people who maybe forgot about it. Like you said, maybe people who weren't as aware of it because it's not as big of a cultural thing, maybe being willing to check it out at home. That has happened with like films like The Northman and stuff that, maybe don't really find their audience in theaters, but become bigger films because of the people involved. So, and that's like kind of what led to like Nosferatu kind of being a bigger film, not to just harp on Robert Eggers or anything, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I don't want to
You
spend
know
too
what my
much time.
theory?
Yeah.
I have a theory. I have a theory about this, and it'll tie into when we review it. But I think this movie probably looks, feels, and smells to audiences like a lot of the original sci-fi stuff, action stuff they've been seeing on Netflix, right? And I think it's that problem of like, why would I go to the theater to see this? I have been conditioned to watch these kinds of movies at home. Like if I'm going to take a risk on something that I don't know the story, so there's going to be a bunch of world building, whatever, even if it's Spielberg, right? Like I'm just going to wait because I just watched that. And the stuff they're watching on Netflix is slop, right? And that's why it's like, well, yeah, it wasn't that great, but I watched it. Ryan Reynolds was in it. There were a couple of jokes. So I think that is one of the symptoms maybe for why people kind of were like not feeling the urgency to see it in the same way that they feel the urgency to see something like, Obsession or Backrooms, because these are the movies people are talking about. You don't want to miss out. That's how the Marvel movies operated back in the day. It was like, well, you got to go see it in theaters. You can't wait. You're going to get spoiled. You're going to find, you don't want to know you got to be part of the, the collective conversation. There was no collective conversation around Disclosure Day. We all knew it got disclosed. Sorry for the spoiler. Okay. Then we have The Furious. And, The Furious, there's not much too much to unpack here. Box office wise, it pretty negligible domestically, which you can expect, but it was definitely it's been commercially relevant in China. It opened at 2.8 million domestically. That's reached 6.4 million so far in North America. Internationally, it's about 30 million. So we're looking at like 36 million worldwide over about 4 to 6 weeks with its various rollouts. And yeah, I mean, so there you go. That's like 80% almost of the entire worldwide gross is just from China itself. And so it's kind of hard to judge, what Lionsgate might be thinking of this one, since it did function more as like a targeted genre release than this kind of like full-scale summer campaign, which I think is such a big missed opportunity. It's only hit 870 locations during its, at least the early domestic run, when I think that they just didn't have faith that people would come out and see it. But I think that if there is a way to position The Furious in a way that makes it really take off, like in the way that RRR did, right? And even RRR during the original run, to be fair, it was only like 14 million, right? So it's not like that was the biggest success in the world. But then what about Monkey Man? Because Monkey Man, that was like 25 million. The first John Wick was like 43 million. Like there is a way to do this, to like bring these action movies out. But I think that they were probably concerned this would be more like a Raid 2. Which is like, yeah, people were hyped for Raid 2. The reviews are incredible. That only made I don't even think it made like 3 million domestically. So I think that's the hurdle to climb. It's not English language. Yeah, it's an action breakout movie, but I think it was always going to be held back as a martial arts film. We don't really know its budget too and how much it costs, but I think that we could guess that it's probably a tight budget based on how it was made, and so I can imagine it have probably profited a little bit of nice little, and I think the movie's going to have legs. I think it's going to stay in the conversation for a while. I think it's going to be a boon for these people's careers, and so I think, in my opinion, strong summer movie, strong movie overall for that world. Do you agree, disagree? Do you hate me?
No, I mean, I think it was always going to be more of a niche release. I think, as you mentioned, it could have been positioned in a way that it wasn't directly in the busy summer noise season. It could have been released in the spring like RRR was, or it could have been, maybe later in the summer when the competition is cooled off a bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much this was going to be a U.S. theatrical success. I think a lot of the people that knew about it, that wanted to see it in theaters, saw it. And the folks who will want to hear about it will eventually hear about it and probably check it out on streaming or VOD. So yeah, it's just kind of what I expected, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, overall, it's interesting because I think Hollywood kind of entered this summer with really high hopes. I think they really wanted to get to about $4 billion for box office. Unfortunately, like so far it's only like 2.4 through I think July 10th was the latest reporting on that. It's possible. It's definitely possible that I think Michael is one of those movies that has helped a lot. I mean, I think that alone has made like 240 million just domestically, like in the summer period, right? Since it came out a little bit earlier or later in the spring, I should say. So that said, it's possible. We have The Odyssey coming out soon. I'm going to be seeing that tomorrow. We have Spider-Man Brand New Day. I think both have the potential to be big hits to shoot. I mean, I don't think either movie is going to make $1 billion, but you still have more weeks for Toy Story. You still have Minions. I don't know. I think it could happen. And we could have another late summer breakout. I think that's very, very possible too.
Yeah, I think The Odyssey is probably going to do really well. I think Spider-Man is probably going to do well as well. Both those could easily crack the top 5 of the summer movie season. Actually, I'd be surprised if they didn't.
Odyssey, I don't know. I think Odyssey is more of a question mark for me if it's going to break the top 5. Probably, I see it existing in that area, but I don't know. I'm really curious.
I think it's going to depend on the buzz, and I just feel like Christopher Nolan's just one of those rare filmmakers right now that he just demands you see him in theaters for every generation. I think and coming off of Oppenheimer, his Best Picture winner, I don't know. I mean, it's not going to be, I think, as big as Oppenheimer financially, but
doesn't have the Barbie, ride-along effect. But it does have Tom Holland. And I think Tom Holland's, jury's still out, right? But
Zendaya and Robert Pattinson and everybody.
Well, I think Tom Holland is like one of those like 4-quadrant actors who just seems to bring out a lot of different types of moviegoers. Zendaya too. And so obviously, like Spider-Man, unless Spider-Man is just like not a good movie, and I think that's why I'm a little bit like, I don't know, or maybe it might not be as good. And I don't think it has like the No Way Home kind of effect where everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're bringing back the other Spider. Yeah, it's not going to do that. It's going to be kind of a more chill Spider movie, I guess. But anyway, let's talk about Toy Story 5 though. Let's actually review this film, and the basic log line here. I have the letterbox description. This is the 5th movie in the franchise, obviously. When Bonnie receives a lily pad tablet as a gift and becomes obsessed, Buzz, Woody, Jesse, and the rest of the gang's jobs become exponentially harder when they have to go head-to-head with the all-new threat to playtime. We're going to get into this in more detail and kind of like what the critical reaction's been. But Will, I care about your reaction to Toy Story 5. I know that I liked it quite a bit. I had a pretty long review of it for in between drafts. But what did you think?
I thought it was pretty good. I feel like by recent Pixar standards, it was perfectly acceptable. I think by Toy Story standards, it was a disappointment. But it's one of those things where it's not the thing I was expecting from Toy Story 3, and it wasn't what I even was expecting from Toy Story 4. Like, by this point, I kind of have more modest expectations. I'm like, okay, they're just going to keep this franchise going seemingly indefinitely at this point. And the ending of this film suggests that this isn't like the next ending to the franchise. It's like, okay, we're probably going to make another one. We're not going to pretend we're not.
Well, they're saying, to be clear, that this is the next one will be the end of the trilogy that is 4 and 5 and then 6. So like the Bonnie trilogy. So the first 3 were Andy, and then this is the second movie in the Bonnie trilogy, essentially.
Sure. That doesn't surprise me.
Will's like, whatever you say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the movie where it kind of feels like the weight of the franchise was holding it down more. I feel like by this point, you got sort of conflating interest in the sense of you want to obviously appeal to the younger audiences, the people that, came into this, the children that, are the core audience. But there's this need to appeal to like the nostalgic millennial and the nostalgic Gen X audience. And I feel like they were able to handle that well with 3. And I think they were able to handle it well with 4. This time it felt a little bit more rocky in the sense of like we had this sort of natural conclusion for Woody and Bo. And I mean, I feel like there's obviously room for Buzz, but it doesn't really feel like this movie had as much that they needed to do with him. And so when you have like Woody and Buzz in this, like I'm happy to see them. They're my friends, it's nice to catch up with them, but I feel like they kind of take away from what is the intended story here, which is with Bonnie and Jesse. And I really like that it is focused on Jesse because not only does it give a chance to Joan Cusack to take the lead, who I don't even know if she ever has been a lead before this, to be honest, and she well deserves it. I mean, she's a fantastic actress, a very underrated actress as well. And I think she gives a very nice vocal performance, and I like spending more direct time with Jesse. But I feel like the movie, it feels less secure, not only in terms of how it incorporates those characters and the older characters, but also with what it wants to say about technology. I appreciate that it is not really trying to take a firm stance on technology is good or technology is bad, but I feel like it doesn't really have a definitive stance. It feels a little wishy-washy as far as like, well, screens can be good, but not too much. And like, I think there's like a mature way to handle it, and I feel like the movie does it okay. Like, I feel like there's a stronger way to handle it in a way that kind of makes it more emotionally resonant. But with those criticisms aside, I thought it was enjoyable. I think a lot of the new characters are fun, especially what's his face, Smarty Pants, Conan O'Brien. I thought he was a real fun addition to this. I like kind of spending time with the new family kind of dynamic that's happening in Bonnie's room. I was a little disappointed that Forky and his betrothed didn't really get more to do in this one, but it was just nice to see those characters.
They do get some killer one-liners, to be fair.
Sure. I was a little disappointed that they didn't get more to do, because I was rewatching the fourth one, and I was like, Forky, like, I liked him the first time, but the rewatch, I'm like, Forky's good. I like Forky. He's funny.
Yeah, I see you like doing your best George Lucas impression. He's like, Forky's the key.
Right. Yeah.
He's key to all of this.
But yeah, it's a really fun voice performance by Tony Hale. So I was a little disappointed that he was kind of neglected to the side. But yeah,
maybe
overall,
in the way that this is all about Jesse, the next one will be all about Forky for you.
Yeah, I wanted to say who the other new additions I like, but I feel it's like kind of a spoiler to say the collective new additions. You know who I'm talking about, though, I think.
Well, there's a couple of different, because this movie goes to a lot of different places. So there's like different micro groups of toys.
Right, yeah, the sequestered group that kind of unexpectedly features into the film.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to controversial canon. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to give it away because I had no idea that was going to happen. And I feel like the most fun I was having with the movie was at the beginning when I was like, I genuinely don't know what's happening.
That's funny. I thought the movie was literally starting with like a short film. A lot of critics did. And we're like, oh, I guess this is part of it. Yeah. So, okay, cool. So that's interesting. You covered, I think, 3 areas of the movie. I know that I've seen a lot of people talk about a lot. And I think those 3 pillars are, we'll start with it. I think elevating Jesse to protagonist, where you and I definitely agree, is that making Jesse more central to this movie makes so much sense. There's a really nice story here about the anxiety she has over, Bonnie kind of shifting her attention as she gets older in a way that doesn't feel like it's a redux of what Woody went through, right? And for what I could gather from the movie, I found a lot of really nice, emotionally coherent stuff there with what the movie is doing and how it weaves the technology stuff in. I think the best scenes here really dig into that, where we're really unpacking like the fear of replacement, right? And not just like a child growing up and not wanting to play with toys, but when a child is still young enough to play with toys, but kind of they change their relationship to how they use their imagination and how they play. And so for me, I thought that was really nice, because then you can revisit one of the franchise's oldest themes, which is like, okay, what do toys owe their children, without, again, simply just repeating what we saw with Woody like 4 movies in a row. So yeah, I think that even if you judge the sequel itself as like, oh, it's unnecessary, I think you can still say, but one nice thing about it is that we do get to give like Joan Cusack her flowers. We do get to get this great Cusack performance, and we get to tie up Jesse's emotional journey in a way that I think does legitimize this movie quite a lot. So I think for all of that, I think that that's a slam dunk. I know you had some complaints, some issues with like how the rest of the cast kind of supports into that. But before we get into that, I want to address the technology thing too, because I think for me, the thing that I think bothered you about it, or that you perceived, I guess, as like wishy-washy, that's actually the thing that I liked about the way they handle the technology here, because the thing I was worried about with like the lily pad character who's voiced by Greta Lee, the thing that I was nervous about was that it was just going to be this preachy, screens are bad, it's just going to basically be like alarmist. And I was really, really nervous about that. And instead, I actually do like the nuance here. I like the balance of like, okay, yes, it is okay to find technology entertaining. Technology can play a crucial role in the evolving needs of a kid, but that doesn't displace physical play. I think like the way this movie tries to work that in feels both timely to me as somebody who doesn't have kids, but I've watched like different generations of kids grow up. Like I've became an uncle when I was 13, right? So my oldest niece versus my youngest nephew, I have seen the way playtime has evolved for these like different generations, right? From Gen Z to Gen Alpha to Gen whatever the third one is. And it is different and it is changing. And I like this movie just isn't outright hostile to modern technology. I actually think that it's actually pretty thoughtful about screen time and how it works. So I guess that's definitely a place where you and I differ. And I think that's actually a very key reason why I connect so much stronger to this than to Lightyear. Because for me, Lightyear was like such a cynical corporate franchise expansion. It was like we were saying before, it was like in search of a reason to exist. But for me, Toy Story 5, it does find this kind of contemporary through line. This change in childhood that I do think is compelling, that it affects the world of these toys, not just the characters we've known for a while, but these other side characters. There's one other thing that I think is key to why I like this movie. And then I know you're probably chomping at the bit. But third, and I think this is probably the thing that makes the movie for me, because you take those other two things away, or if you don't have this, I think those other two things don't work nearly as well. And that is just like the craft and the comedic density of this movie just push it above that level for me. I think I can't imagine people disagreeing on how good the animation is here. Visually immaculate. I love how expressive they've continued to let the characters be, even as it's a more technically polished production as a movie. There's so many small details in here that I just adore. It's just watching butter on screen. It's so nice to see a studio put so much thought and attention into these worlds, and it just feels so nice and so easy and immersive. And then the comedy. I mean, I just think the comedy here is so good. It's so much better, in my opinion, than Toy Story 4, which I think had good comedy, but it was so, I just like scattered. But this is like constantly hitting you with good jokes in a way that Toy Story 2 was, which is my favorite of these movies. And this is the register I like the Toy Story movies in the most, where it's like funny, 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 sad, existential dread, funny, funny, funny. Like that is where I like these movies the most, for sure. And I think as you mentioned, Conan O'Brien's Smarty Pants, I thought he was just amazing. I just love his whole thing. I love the play sequences in this, how they use the supporting toys to kind of like keep things comedically inventive and fun. And like, even if we're spending time with like these newer characters, because they're funny, because the jokes are actually good, I'm like, man, especially probably because like I had just watched Scary Movie like right before I saw this, and I was like, oh, this is how you be funny. And so for me, those are the three things that make the movie and kind of push it, like for me, above Toy Story 4. And put it in a place where I'm like, I had a much better time watching this versus Toy Story 4, which I actually thought I thought was good too. I thought it was a good movie and well done, but I didn't find as successful as a movie as this one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with the idea. Toy Story 2 is the pinnacle of this franchise. It's so seamless, but it looks, great, and it
Holds up.
moves so great, and it's funny all the time, and it has the emotional pathos. It's the full package, and I feel like the franchise, for as good as it's kind of been chasing that high and never quite matching it, but in its own little peers finding success. I guess where we really differ, and this is maybe just informed by my recent rewatch, is that I think I find myself more endeared to 4 upon rewatch, in a way that maybe if I rewatch this movie, I'll be a little bit more benevolent to it. But yeah, I feel like the fourth movie, I think initially I was more held up on kind of like the baggy second act of it and the ways that it fell short to the first 3 films. But upon rewatch, it is a funnier, more vivid film than I remembered. And I feel like this movie, it has a great premise. I think it has some thoughtful things to say about relationships to screen time with the younger generation. It's one of those things that just simply, I think, cannot be ignored. But yeah, finding the happy medium. I guess where I differ from you is just that I feel like the messaging of it's admirable to do the kind of median take it's taking. I just didn't really find it to be as engrossing or as thoughtful as I think it could have been. I just feel like it kind of plays out as to be expected, especially considering that Lily Pad, without getting into spoilers, is kind of thrown to the side of the narrative for a lot more of the film than I anticipated, and I feel like that hurts more than helps the film, considering that Jessie kind of goes on a side adventure away from Lily Pad, and I feel like that maybe kind of takes away from the impact that was intended in the end of the film. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good performance from Greta Lee. I think she did a nice job. I kind of like that she could keep the monotone, but keep the passive aggressive at the same time. It's just like that nice balance that is a testament to her as an actress. Yeah, I feel like a lot of what you're saying is true. I guess I just didn't really connect to it as much as you did. Unfortunately, I just felt like this one, in a way that I didn't find the other four Pixar films, was a little bit more perfunctory to me. It just kind of felt like it was maybe going through the motions a little bit more. There was definitely some spontaneity with some of the side characters, for sure, particularly the ones we are not talking about. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. I definitely think it's better than most fifth installments of animated franchises. Like, I don't even remember Ice Age 5, but I'm sure this clears it 100%.
You're like, I melted down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, I think from what I can gather, I think there are two really valid criticisms of this movie, right? As much as I like the movie, I think that they are pretty glaring. And I think we have to all admit, I'll admit it too, like it is like the franchise exhaustion is visible, right? Like it's really hard to get away from that. I think like you can admire the craftsmanship of the movie while still feeling like, yeah, this movie's kind of just doing a lot of the same things the other Toy Story movies have done, right? Where you have a toy that fears obsolescence, a child growing or changing, the group is separated, there's a rescue mission, there's an emotional reckoning, there's attachment and letting go. So it's like, yes, Pixar can still execute this pattern extremely well, but it's still kind of a pattern where you wish there wasn't as visible a pattern. And I think that that's a very fair criticism. I think that you could also describe this movie as inconsequential in some ways, a little repetitive, a little maybe emotionally prepackaged in some ways. But, I think it depends on like how you dice that tomato and how much you value the way the film carries all that stuff off. The second criticism that I think was a little bit more tied into like what you were talking about, the technology stuff, which is that, and I kind of agree with this. I think the theme itself is a little tidier than the reality, right? And maybe that's just like a symptom of the fact that this is made for kids, like when it comes down to it. But I do think like the conflict between the toys and the screens, it does raise some complicated questions, and it finds like the kind of balance in between, right? But you could argue very fairly that I think the film ultimately like softens these questions that it itself is raising as these like hard existential like toys are over kind of reactions. And I think maybe a more probing version of this movie would ask like whether or not the physical toys actually possess like any special moral superiority or something, where like I think in this case like it's leaning more into like what is the ideal healthy childhood development, and really like letting those two ideas go to blows, right? Or is this a case where like adults are maybe projecting their own technological discomfort, their own kind of like weaponized nostalgia onto kids who are like, this is just how we're experiencing the world and it's different from how you did, but that's okay. And I'm talking about stuff that's obviously kind of intense, I guess, for even a Pixar movie. But it is something that I think the movie itself is kind of starting to dig into, but then it just sort of retreats a little bit.
I feel like if you compare this again to 2, there's a really interesting avenue you could explore here about the idea of like that movie obviously kind of deals with the generational gap between the Western cowboy era and the spaceman, technological sci-fi era that came thereafter. And I feel like a more interesting, probably a more daring film, especially if they're bringing back Woody, would have maybe Woody being more antagonistic while Jesse kind of learns to soften to it, and maybe even go so far as to have Woody be a direct antagonist of this film in the way that like Stinky Pete was in the first movie. And that would find a way to kind of talk about similar things, but make it a little bit more existentially rich in a way that the second movie can be.
I do wonder if maybe that was one of the original ideas that they had. But they were just like, we can't do that. He's our prized pig.
Right.
People love Woody. They're not going to root against him.
Right. And I'm not trying to editorialize the film or like make my
No, please do,
it,
actually.
right?
I think that's more fun than...
But my point is just that, like, I think there's a way you can, especially with a premise like this, I think it's smart and I think it's the right way to make a fifth movie about Toy Story now. I just feel like it kind of stunts itself in a way that just like, it does what it needs to do. It's fine. I think it's amusing enough and it's looks good and it's entertaining enough that it gets by. But if it wanted to meet the levels of the past films, I feel like there was an extra step it needed to take. And it feels like rather than take that step, it's just like, we're good here. Like, this is fine. We're good. We'll just take this step right here and then hope for the best. Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's just like, I think it does its job. Like, I think it's fine. I just feel like compared to the other Pixar movies, with the exception of Lightyear, obviously, which is the nadir of the theatrical Toy Story films. I don't even know if I count that as a Toy Story film. It's like Toy Story adjacent at best. But yeah, it just feels like it doesn't quite match the heights, and I mean that's fine. I'm an adult, I can handle it. But yeah, I just feel
I
like
don't know, Will. Your eyes are a little watery, but
yeah, a little bit.
just
Yeah,
let it out.
yeah. I think it's fine. I think it's pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up liking Minions and Monsters a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once we get to Toy Story 6, maybe once you rewatch Toy Story 5, that'll be the real test,
Yeah, that's a good point.
how it holds up then. So yeah, I guess, some disagreements here. I definitely liked it a lot more, but I will say, where we can agree is I don't think obviously either of us think it's some kind of masterpiece of the series, but overall it's being received as a pretty successful franchise sequel. Obviously, it's outperforming Pixar's other more recent attempt to exploit this IP. And I think if they're going to do that, I'd rather get this than something like Lightyear. And yeah, I think it's going to continue to do well. And this is overall pretty warmly received by the critics and the audiences. We're a little on time though, so we're not going to do our normal stuff where, usually we'll look at what our friends have to say and then we'll do Rotten Tomatoes. But we have 2 other movies to get to.
I was gonna say, if I can make a quick suggestion, let's just do Furious right now because I feel like there's probably less to say, and then we can end it on Disclosure Day because there's a little bit more. I think.
Oh, yeah, that was my plan.
Oh, right on. Okay, cool.
Yeah, look at that. I was feeling like The Furious would be our nice little intermission. So yeah, let's talk about The Furious. The Furious, this is, I want to start off by saying, I think this is like going to go down as one of the defining martial arts films of the decade. I think no question. This movie is doing super well. Of the 3 movies we're talking about, it has the most emphatic critical response, 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's from 144 reviews, 95% verified audience score. And I think critics and viewers agree it is just like unusually strong for a movie of this kind of thing. Like in the ultra violent genre that it occupies, even with a deliberately like kind of thin narrative, it's just, I just think the consensus for me is like so straightforward. Like this story just works. Like I should say the story itself is functional, but the movie and like the action filmmaking is just on another level. Absolutely extraordinary. I do need to tee it off because I know, like I just said, it's a pretty thin narrative, but if we're gonna boil it down, the letterboxed summary here is: after the daughter of Wang Wei is kidnapped by a criminal network and he receives no help from the corrupt police, Wei sets out on a rampage to find her himself. His only ally is Navin, a relentless journalist whose wife has mysteriously disappeared. Fueled by a furious vengeance, the unlikely duo ruthlessly fights against the kidnappers in this explosive martial arts showdown. So what a lot of people are basically saying, it's like The Raid meets John Wick meets Taken, basically. And if you really dig into like who's in this movie, it's a who's who of like martial arts filmmaking like legends. We have Jay Mao, of course, in this film, who is legendary Chinese actor and martial artist. He began his career actually as a child actor from Beijing. He did a bunch of stuff with like Jet Li back in the day. He was in the New Legend of Shaolin, My Father is a Hero. He's really the main character here, and he's a force. But we also have Navin is played by Joe Taslim, who is from, he's an Indonesian actor, and I'm trying to remember what he was in. He was in Jackass. He was Jackass in The Raid in 2011, and I don't think he was in The Raid 2, but I could be wrong. I don't remember. It's been a while. So anyway, lots of great actors, lots of great action stuff in this movie. But Will, I'm curious, what did you think of The Furious?
I mean, this movie is just fun. Yeah, I mean, I was already going to make the joke that it's my favorite Taken movie, but you kind of beat me to the punch. Yeah, I have a real soft spot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have a real soft spot for vigilante movies. And I like that this one, by and large, kind of cuts to the chase. There's like, extraneous stuff that deals with the villains and kind of the side characters that populate this world. I do wrestle with whether I find it more endearing or a flaw that the world in this movie is like incredibly small.
Yeah.
Like to the point like midway through, there's like this scene that's like kind of ripping off Hard Boiled, but like in a fun way, with like this like large building and people coming out. And it made me question, like, are there like 25 people in this town? It looks pretty big, but like, or like 12 of them kids. But yeah, no, it really is a testament to the execution of the film. I think the beginning, once you really get into the inciting incident and the action, it just rips. There's beautiful action choreography here. The director, I'm going to butcher the name as I usually do.
Kenji Tanigaki.
Tanigaki is like a long time, like 30, maybe even 40-year long martial arts choreographer. And periodical director, and you can just tell that having that expertise really amplified this film. There's a lot of clear, fluid action in a way that is still cinematic, but it just kind of moves, and you get the breadth of the action in a way that doesn't feel too claustrophobic or tense. I think by the middle, I was like I kind of mentioned, like I was like, okay, like it's kind of slowing down a bit. It's cool. I didn't really understand by that point, like the raid comparisons in the sense of like I really enjoyed the first half. I felt it was kind of tampering down, but then when you get to the third act and the police station, it really just picks up and becomes just like the movie I think that people are making it out to be. That extended fight sequence in the third act is some of the most fun I've had at the movie theater all year. And my favorite part, without giving too much away, is this sort of wild card character.
Yes.
That kind of comes in.
My audience erupted. They were so excited.
In a way, it's like he's fun when you presume that he's like in it for this one early fight scene and they kind of do away with him. But then he just comes into the fold and is like when you playing like a video game with like 3 of your friends and a 4th one comes in and he has no alliances and he just kind of wants to mess with everybody. And he just like
pretty much.
Yeah, it's just so like that stuff is like I know that scene is going to just annihilate on YouTube when people share it with their friends and stuff like that. That's so fun. I think as a whole, as a movie, it can be a little wobbly. Like I said, I think there's because the narrative's kind of thin and stuff like that. I don't know if it has the integral narrative structure of the first 2 or the only 2 Raid movies, but I think it's easy to see why this one's going to be a favorite for the martial arts genre. And like I said, at its best, I had some of the most fun I've had the movies this year. It's like just pure visceral action. And for at least 75% of it, I had a big smile on my face, just having a good time at the movies.
Oh man, same here. This is probably my favorite movie of the year so far. It's up there. And I love a good action romp, right? And yeah, to your point, like I hadn't seen any of Kenji Tanagaki's movies before. Like I'd never seen the Shinobi movies, which I know he's pretty well known for. But I think like just getting into the fight choreography itself and what makes it special, it is amazing how they're able to preserve the bodily clarity like through these scenes. Like you can see like the fighter's movement and understand the geography. You can feel like the physical consequences of like every single strike. And like that is really hard to do. Like I am so like that's kind of what makes the movie so fun. Is the constant, like, how did they do that? And it's what makes it rewatchable, too. I think that kind of leans into why I was like, man, what a missed opportunity in terms of, like, you market this movie a certain way, you get people wanting to see this multiple times in the theater. I'm sure that still happened, right? Because even as niche as it is, I think a lot of people were just kind of, like, coming out again and again. But of course, this is built for VHS. This is built for, like, let's get into the living room and watch this thing. Doesn't matter the size of the screen. You're gonna love these sequences, right? Like I really like it because so many like modern action movies, they just kind of end up being these like rapid collections of like kind of low stakes impacts. But these scenes have like spatial ideas behind them. Like the weapons are constantly changing. That's where a lot of like the John Wick stuff kind of comes in, the shifting alliances and everything. And it just becomes increasingly absurd, but there's always like physical punishment attached to it. Like things don't just get crazy and like plateau in terms of the stakes. They get crazy and like people suffer for it. And I think that's kind of what makes it work. Like it is such a great case study in the anatomy of a fight scene, like how like it should be taught. Like this is one of those like movies, like many great martial arts movies can be taught in terms of like every fight scene needs to have a beginning, middle, and end. It needs to have like a 3-act structure to it for it to be its optimal self, right? Not just kind of be this like going on and on to the point where everything starts to blur. No, it's like a ballet, right? And you need to be inventive, and it's hard to be inventive, and it needs to be in some ways brutal, but also like brutally precise, right? So yeah, I think like that's what makes this thing a spectacle is like the physicality.
Yeah, and then I just, as I was kind of alluding to before, just really enjoy seeing this in theaters because I feel like, as you mentioned, like with the VHS kind of thing, I think there was a time, like certainly it was a case for like the early John Woo movies as well as the early Jackie Chan movies. Like they didn't really get a presence stateside, and you kind of had to find out about them on your own. Like you'd have to go to a VHS store like that had like cool genre stuff, and like the guy had to be like, oh, we like martial arts movies. You should check out this movie, The Furious. It's pretty badass. And that's how you'd find out about it, like 2 or 3 years after it came out in China or in its initial release. And I like that Lionsgate, even though they could have done more to promote it and amplify this, I appreciate that they did give it a pretty wide theatrical release and let it be seen in a wide major way that most of the time movies like this don't. So for all the faults of modern day theatrical play, I'll give props where they're due. It is good to see this movie during its initial run and seeing it kind of gain an audience with time, and hopefully will continue to expand in the months to come, because it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think like on top of that, right? Like having the martial arts work is one thing, but you also need to have like good performers too, right? It's like already mentioned Jay Mao and Joe Taslim, but also Yayan Ruhian is in this. He's been in a lot of things. He's been in the John Wick movies. He was in the Raid 2. He was in Star Wars: Force Awakens. Like he's been all over the map over the years. He kind of comes in as like the like king of the henchmen in this, like bow and arrow dude.
Yeah.
And I think what works, and also like the main villain of this too, Joey Iwanaga, who is like the biggest surprise in this movie for me, because like you kind of, I think, lightly teased it, right? Where it's like he doesn't do much for a lot of the movie, but then it's like in the third act he just becomes like a force of nature. He was in Rurouni Kenshin, the movie, the final one, and then he also was in he was in one of Kenji Tanagaki's previous movies. I forget which one, but he just ends up being like one of the biggest surprises. And I think what I like so much about the way these performers are all kind of like showcasing, it's like the fights themselves are designed to showcase their actual abilities. You can tell they put a lot of thought and effort into what these people can really do without tons of like stunt substitution and trying to do all these like frantic cutting techniques, speaking of like the Taken movies.
Sure.
So and I think that's key to why this movie works so well, because it's like back in the olden days, we used to want to watch spectacle on the big screen because it's like CGI is evolving and like the CGI is getting better and better. It's like, I got to go see Jurassic Park. The dinosaurs look real. We got to a point, right, where it's like the CGI has really just hit this apex of like, it's not going to get any better necessarily. So what's next? Like, what is going to get people to want to see something on the big screen? And I think that combination of just really good stunt choreography with these performers who are one of a kind, like Brian Lay as well. He was in... I was
going to say, he's the wild card, right? Isn't Brian Lay the wild card?
Yes. He was in Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
He is like such a good example of this, of like, he has a very specific fighting style. And so like when he comes in, like that wild card you're talking about, the way that action kind of plays into the movie is so key to why the action scene is entertaining, because his style contrasts like so differently with like the other ones. Again, like that is something that makes me want to see the movie and rewatch the movie and not wait, right? Like I do want to experience it with a crowd, because it's like, sure, effects are really nice, but the performers, I think, are the special effects.
Yeah. And I'm glad you talked about Zimao, because I in addition to his prowess as an action star, I do really like the like kind of intuitive, silent, steely presence that he brings to the film. It's something that can be overlooked, but I think, there is that like understated emotionality that he brings to it that's not too forced or too showy, but really drives the film in a key way that I think is part of the reason why this movie works as well as it does. I will say, though, acting-wise, there are a few performances, and I don't want to like, drag it out a little bit, and I think it's probably just because they have to speak English.
Yeah, there's some bad dubbing in this.
There's
like
some performances in this that, it's just like, basically like, what's the meaning of this? It's just like kind of over the top. And you could say the same thing about R, I think, to an extent. But, like I said, the strengths of the film, you just kind of overlook those. And it's just like, okay, it's a little silly. It's a little goofy. I think if people don't know that, though, going into it, just know that there are a couple English language moments that you kind of have to be like, all right, the action's going to come back.
Exactly. It's all easy to forgive. Like, it's easy to forgive. Like, yes, it's a very conventional narrative. It's very like simplistic emotionally. Like, okay, it's a revenge movie. There's not a lot of depth here. I think Raid 2 is more successful in terms of like having more of like a sprawling crime saga feel to it. I think RRR is more successful of like the pathos and you really like falling in love with these characters. This is like The Furious is like so uninterested in like world building or anything like that. And I think in some ways, like, I actually think that simplicity can be a little refreshing, even if it does kind of limit, I think the reach this could have thematically. It's like it's specialized as a movie. And I think that's why it works, right? It's not attempting these things and failing. It's just like, yeah, you just take what you can get here and enjoy. And it's still, the only other thing that I think I've seen, because like I took a look and not a single one of our, like not a single friend of the show who's reviewed this movie gave it like an outright negative review. I think the lowest I saw was like a 3-star from Corey Everett, which is, pretty, positive enough. I think to some people, maybe the relentlessness can be a little numbing, I could, eventually it can be so exhausting that like it starts to feel like, the impact is having less. At a certain point, it's so implausible. Like, how could people survive this? Like, you start to feel like, okay, maybe it's just a cartoon physically in terms of its physics. And I can understand that negative reaction, but I think that's been few and far.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why I find myself so endeared to the third act is that, like, once you get to the kind of second act, it gets a little cartoony, and, like, for the most part, the movie's not very bloody. Until you get to the third act, there's, like, one key scene where things just really get kind of gory and bloody in a good way, I think. I mean, it might turn some people off, but I like that shift because it's just like, all right, we're getting less cartoonish and we're going to get like, there's visceral like consequences now. Like things are getting intense. And at the same time, though, there is like you said, with I'm going to look up his name just real quick, Brian Lee, there is still like that kind of cartoonish element still there, but there is more amplified consequences. And so like, I think it really kind of finds its harmony by that third act. And that's when you want it to be at its best. So, it rewards the audience in that respect.
All right. Well, that is The Furious. I think it's still in some screens if you can catch it, but however you can watch it legally, of course. Definitely be sure to do that. I think it's well worth your time. Let's finish out the show, though, with Disclosure Day. This is the newest film directed by Steven Spielberg. What was that?
I said, yeah.
Yeah, that's our guy.
Yeah.
We have Emily Blunt in this, Josh O'Connor, Colin Firth, Colman Domingo, Eve Hewson, but also Wyatt Russell, who we didn't mention before, is in this as well. All right, so the letterboxed summary for this one says, a cybersecurity expert becomes a whistleblower after uncovering secrets about aliens, putting him on the run from a corporation. Meanwhile, a meteorologist experiencing strange phenomena joins forces with him to prove there's life beyond our understanding. As mentioned before, this is yet another Steven Spielberg kind of original alien joint. He, of course, I think myself included, I was wondering if this would be like a stealth sequel to Close Encounters. It's more of like a spiritual sequel. And then we have, of course, like E.T., War of the Worlds, Jurassic Park. I mean,
Minority Report.
That's not aliens, but I'm talking about like, in terms of like sci-fi movies, but yeah.
Yeah,
He's
it's
back.
like a kind of combination of Close Encounter and Minority Report.
Yes, that's a pretty good way to sum it up. But Will Ashton, I know that I like Disclosure Day. I enjoyed it. I thought that it was quite entertaining. I had my qualms with it, of course. But what about you? Were you glad that there was a day of disclosure?
Yeah, I will be honest and say I'm kind of surprised by the mixed reception to the film because I think this is one of my favorite films of the year so far.
Oh my gosh.
And
I've seen some critics have gone to town on this movie. I have seen some people be like really like emphatically negative with this. Very funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think the movie has flaws. I think it's a little overstuffed. I don't think it quite reaches the heights of some of his best films. It's not E.T. It's probably not even Close Encounters. But I think there's something about it that I just feel like people are kind of underwriting or maybe overlooking some of its intended points. And I feel like what I find most fascinating about the film is that it is a film about faith in a way that's like, and I'm not the first to make this comparison, our friend Corey Woodruff has been talking about as well. It feels like his version of Silence in a way of like, where do you find faith in the world that, things are constantly wearing you down? There's so little hope. Everything feels sort of apocalyptic. Everything is coming to a head. And I think he found a really compelling way to balance the idea of faith in like a religious sense and faith in something otherworldly or something communal that can bring everyone together in a humane sense. And I get that for some folks, this is very sentimental. This is very sort of, kind of cloying to some, maybe overly mawkish, but I don't know. I found myself pretty moved by it. I think it's a very open-hearted exploration of, what drives humanity in times of darkness. I don't think it's saying anything, like totally new, but I don't think it's necessarily trying to be, something that's like that Spielberg hasn't done or explored before. It's a collection of his themes come together in a very present and modern way. And I think that is why this feels like one of his most modern films, why the use of like phones and technology plays so present in this film in a way that they haven't in most, if not any, Spielberg movie prior to this. I just found it to be very touching and it looks fantastic. It has some of my favorite cinematography this year, some expert blocking, of course, from Spielberg.
I know you love that lens flare.
I do like a lens flare. And I think Emily Blunt, this is one of her best performances in a long time.
I agree. I said so in my review. I'm glad you agree. I'm surprised a little bit. I didn't think you would like this that much. I was hoping you would like it, but of course, maybe be more similar to me where you have your qualms. But I want to point something out here that you might find interesting because, we were talking before about how the summer's been shaping up. And, there's a movie theater. I know I've told you about it. It's like 2 blocks away from where I live. And so I drive past it every day going home. And it's one of those like old fashioned theaters. It has the marquee and it's independent and it has just 2 screens. So there are only ever 2 movies playing at once. And so you can see like what those movies are. And even though like Disclosure Day came out a while ago, it has been like the marquee movie this entire time. They only just took it out. And like it was like Disclosure Day and Toy Story 5 for weeks and weeks. They didn't even play Supergirl, right? They didn't even play Minions and Monsters. That should tell you something. But and obviously it's like one of those theaters that I think is appealing to a certain type of moviegoer versus like the younger folks. But it is interesting to me that like Disclosure Day kind of is like going for that more kind of like I was talking about before, like not just a mid-budget feel, but like the kind of movies that like older adults would go see, but not necessarily the people who would go see like Pressure, which is like that's getting a little bit older. This is kind of going for interesting, like older millennials and Gen X. I feel is like where Spielberg is really trying to operate here in terms of like finding his audience, because I don't get the sense that he thinks like this is a baby boomer type movie. I don't know if you agree or disagree. Obviously, I know boomers have come out and have seen it, but I don't know if it like really. I feel like this movie more specializes the Gen Xers who grew up on E.T., who grew up on Close Encounters. Obviously, boomers did too, sort of, but they were all like older when Close Encounters came out. Like they were in their like 20s versus like Gen Xers were like kids or younger. So I don't know if you agree, but I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to kind of tie this with Toy Story in the sense that franchise has kind of served as a commentary of its time at different points, and obviously its relationship to technology in this most recent one. But this movie, I feel like, Spielberg has used UFOs or aliens to kind of comment on the times throughout his career, throughout multiple decades, 70s, 80s, and then the 2000s. Arguably also with the fourth Indiana Jones to some extent. But yeah, I mean,
I knew there was another one I was forgetting, but yes.
But, with War of the Worlds, you have this kind of rich, post 9/11 commentary, and it's like a pretty dour film, and it's heavy, and it uses the H.G. Wells material to kind of comment on their times. And I think a lot of those movies, especially Close Encounters and E.T., and obviously War of the Worlds, deals with the idea of the actual, UFO landing and the relationship meeting aliens. In this movie, what I find so endearing and fascinating about it, it's not about the invasion. It's about humanity reckoning with that information in a sort of like, post, WikiLeaks kind of world. It's this idea of paranoia and also like this internet age of like misinformation and the idea of people doubting and not wanting to believe what's in front of them. And I know that people take the ending as being sort of outdated and maybe old-fashioned, but I think what I find so refreshing and fascinating is like, even in an age now where screens can feel like we have AI and we have all these things that can dilute and make people not believe, and we also have like these corruptible news sources that will kind of tell people what they want to hear as opposed to the truth. At the end of the day, there is a hope that humanity can be driven by what's real and undeniable. And I don't know, I just find that to be really impactful. Maybe it's too hopeful, maybe it's wistful, I don't know. But like, to me, that's an old man giving hope to a new generation. And I guess as I get older, I find myself more endeared to these sort of late period films from filmmakers who are recognizing that they're near or at the end of the ropes and are just like trying to impart hope and wisdom and sincerity rather than just kind of just being like, well, you're screwed, good luck. So I don't know, I just think there's a lot of fascinating meat here, and I think there's ways that this elevates Spielberg as a genre filmmaker, but it just ties into everything that he's kind of talked about and also makes it very modern. So yeah, I just think it's a really meaty text in a way that most summer blockbusters just aren't, especially nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, and Spielberg needed this movie. He needed a swing for sure, because he hasn't had the best go of it more recently. I think Ready Player One was like his last plain success. Since then, we've gotten like West Side Story and Fabelmans, which like Fabelmans was well received and all. I mean, West Side Story was too, but these were both kind of like award season movies that just didn't really generate the box office they needed. People blame the COVID stuff, but I think Fabelmans too, it's just they had a hard time finding an audience. That said, this is like kind of harkening back to what I think he does best, which is that kind of like 4-quadrant spectacle, but with like a point and a purpose and a pathos. So let's start with what I think some of the more positive stuff. I think some of the stuff maybe you and I will definitely agree on. And then I do want to get into some of the criticisms that I don't necessarily have, but I have seen floating around that I think are interesting. But starting with the positive stuff, I think you already talked about it. Emily Blunt, I think that she is, I think universally, almost universally, people agree this is like one of her strongest performances, if not the best of her career. I think that me personally, like in this movie, I particularly admire her ability to move between these different modes. Like in one moment, she's like, she has this like intellectual urgency. In another moment, she's like just basically afraid. In another moment, she has that Spielbergian awe. She like doesn't feel passive, even though in a lot of this movie, she is a very passive vessel. Like, it's so funny to me how she manages to like pull that off. Like, it's really fascinating. And I think that she kind of captures the entire tonal argument of the movie just in her character, which is, all right, well, you have this knowledge of extraterrestrial life. You know, can it produce terror or will it produce wonder? And I think the argument the movie makes is through the Emily Blunt character, like both simultaneously, like at the same time, that terror and wonder kind of go hand in hand. And even if you say, I know people will say like, yeah, the screenplay is a bit overloaded. She holds it all together. You can have all these characters, you can have some of the stuff that doesn't work as well, but I think she's the emotional force, the glue that makes the whole thing work. And it seems to me, Will Ashton, that you agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, while I do like Josh O'Connor, and I actually think Coleman Domingo and Colin Firth are also really good in this too. But yeah, it's Emily Blunt's show, and it's just a tremendous showcase. It kind of just reminded me why she's such a great actress. Like, she's been in good movies, but I feel like she hasn't been the standout, like Oppenheimer, and you know, she just repraised one of her most famous roles. And
don't forget Mary Poppins Returns. Come on now,
boy. Man, that movie. But yeah, I mean, it was just like great to just see like, all right, this is why Emily Blunt is Emily Blunt. And yeah, I think it's probably not going to get awards consideration, even though it should. But yeah, she has to carry this very tricky tightrope. And it also deals with some kind of heavy other like subtext stuff as well. I don't know if you want to dive into that or not, but like just some really like fascinating stuff in her character. And it could have been for a lesser performer, maybe cumbersome or you know, too much, but I think she handles it with grace and talent, and yeah, it's a tremendous performance.
Yeah, and it's not to unfairly compare these actresses or to pit them against each other, but I do think it's in some ways she has to do some things that are similar to Renata Reinzev's character in Backrooms. And while I think that was a good performance, and I think Backrooms is a very good movie, I think that Blunt just at least, especially, I mean, you have to weigh like what she's given here. I think she's just more successful as that kind of character in this context than I remember Reinstedt being in Backrooms, even though I liked it. So another thing, though, that I liked about the movie, because we could keep digging into it, but I do want to bring up one thing about Spielberg that you have to give the guy, even to his haters or his late stage haters, his ability to stage these clear, like legible, accessible spectacles. I mean, it's what he does best. Like the way that he can set up these like sequences of suspense, the way that he can create visual scale, how the final act kind of unfolds as that kind of thing, even though it's not an action scene. I think he's one of the better directors even today at making the expensive studio film feel more fluid than mechanical, which that's the big problem a lot of these directors run into, especially the ones who try to emulate Spielberg or they try to emulate Nolan or Villeneuve. Like, they're given a bunch of money, but you just feel the machinery. You could practically hear the gear like turning, versus like Spielberg just like makes it feel human, and he puts the money to work in a way that I think is really impressive, always have. So yeah, I think that it's like, that's what makes it feel more like classical Hollywood entertainment, where it's like, it's serious, but it's not grim. And it's definitely like accessible for like people of lots of different ages, but it's not overly simplistic, right? And a lot of that is because there's so much physicality here. Even though there's CGI and stuff, like there's not a lot of visual noise in this. Like things are just, you know where you're supposed to be looking. You know what the characters are saying and supposed to be doing. The script isn't the best part, and we'll talk about that. But even in the parts where I thought the script was incomprehensible, the visual language was so clear that I think he just kind of gets away with it. Especially because, like, for sci-fi, a lot of sci-fi blockbusters fail. Even the really good ones, like Blade Runner 2049, just fell flat for a bunch of people because the lore, the franchise maintenance stuff was too much. It was like overload, digital overload, even though that movie is a masterpiece. But I think this is an example of, like, how you can do it in a way that, like, critics will still, I think for the most part, enjoy and be like, yeah, there's good stuff here. But like audiences will also kind of respond to it as like, oh yeah, cool. I like this. I think this is just like, a nice like shot in the arm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I definitely think, because this is David Knopp, I think, that wrote the script. And he said, or is it Nope?
It's David Cope or Kep.
Okay. Kep.
I think I usually say David Kep, but I don't know if that's the correct way. It's spelled Koepp. Take your pick.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like, he's worked with Spielberg a fair bit, and he obviously Jurassic Park is the most famous example, and he's
Also
just a
Spider-Man.
real, well, yeah, but Spielberg didn't direct Spider-Man.
I know, but you were talking about his filmography in general, Will Ashton. Oh my God.
But he is just one of those screenwriters who I feel is very hit and miss. Like last year, he wrote one of the best screenplays in Black Bag, and he wrote one of the weakest screenplays in Jurassic World Rebirth, or whatever it was called.
You got it right.
I feel like this, and I feel like this movie, it's not one of his best scripts, but I think it works. It's very functional. I feel like, Spielberg, who has a story credit on it, probably had a lot of ideas, and I don't know if Kep was able to fluidly or like intricate them into the screenplay, but as you mentioned, I think it is a testament to Spielberg that even if his ideas aren't always, completely streamlined, I think he has the visual expertise to really land most, if not all of those in some way or another. And so, yeah, I think having, I forget the guy's name, the Angels in America guy who co-wrote the screenplay for The Fabelmans, if he had him on the docket to write the screenplay, I think this would have been probably just a straight up masterpiece. As it is, I think it's a really strong movie.
I think you're talking about Tony Kushner.
Kushner, yes, that's it. I feel like Kushner would have just like really rounded this out in a more kind of streamlined, direct way. But as David Nope is concerned, I think it's functional, comes together, but it has some of his great strengths and some of his weaknesses. It's kind of one of those screenplays that has a little bit of both going on for it.
I only had one other thing in terms of like the things, the positives that I think is worth highlighting, but you already kind of touched on it, which is like the humanism of this movie. The way it kind of treats that extraterrestrial disclosure as this kind of like moral but also social question, right? And it kind of goes beyond like the conspiracy stuff in a way that's very interesting. It's a movie that's more interested in like the institutional secrecy, but how that blends with the faith and human connection, and how the aliens themselves, like they matter less in this movie as monsters and more as a means of, like you said, like asking whether humanity can deal with it and cope with it. If they can absorb this reality that would dismantle things that they already know to be true. And I think the only thing I'll add to that, because you already covered it, but I think that kind of optimism that Spielberg brings around the subject, it does feel kind of defiant, in this current time when so many people, or so much of what we think of this stuff is shaped by that conspiratorial thinking, by that institutional distrust. I think that humanism approach that Spielberg brings to it is kind of what I think lands the plane. Because if it had just been a little bit more straightforward, I don't think the movie would have been nearly as interesting. If it had just been like Minority Report, we got to get to the disclosure. And if it had only gestured at these themes and not spent as much time as it does actually building them out and proving them out, I don't think the movie would have worked nearly as well.
Yeah, that's where, again, I have to kind of get into, kind of poo-pooing the critics. And like I said, there's things I can criticize about the film that I agree with, including the special effects, which I think are a little also kind of hit and miss. It doesn't bother me as much as it, I think, does for some folks, but I agree that the Spielberg has had better looking movies in terms of the visual, special effects are concerned. But I feel like people, like, especially with the end and the hopeful optimism of it, I see a lot of folks being like, oh, look at that, Grandpa's getting misty-eyed or whatever. And I just don't get, it's like, what do you want? Like a movie where it's like, people discover aliens and they don't care. Goodbye. Like, what you want? Like a cynical movie about that? Like, the movies can be used as a source of hope and optimism, and that's what Spielberg has always done. I mean, he can get into some kind of dark, heavy subject matter as he has with Schindler's List and Munich and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, this is meant to be a rallying call, and it's going to be optimistic in that respect. I guess that's where I get really baffled with some of the criticisms. And if it doesn't work for some folks, that's fine. I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss anyone that didn't get anything. If anything, I just feel bad. But yeah, I don't really get the folks who are bemoaning the intended sincerity of the film. I think it's a strength, not its weakness.
Well, let's get into some of the. I mean, these are some of the complaints that I have seen from critics, and I don't necessarily agree with them, but I think there are some interesting ideas here that are worth chewing on. But I think the most common complaint I have seen, and then I kind of agree to an extent, but not that much, is I do think the movie's narrative sprawl can hold it back a little bit. It has, at times, it does feel like it has too many characters, too many strands, too many ideas. That's not inherently bad, but I think what happens is the script then becomes too messy. There's just certain things that happen in this movie where I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Characters are doing things here that just don't quite click. The way we're getting out of this situation and moving the plot forward, and there are times when it feels implausible. There's something involving like a car chase thing and how that resolves where I was like, no, like, give me a break. There's another thing here involving like trying to stop this like studio broadcast thing. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Why don't you just like a lot of like the machinery around like how this movie doesn't really get into like the government that much. Like the government's a factor, but it's really this like corporate entity. And a lot of that stuff did feel messy to me. It didn't feel like very well explained. And I think because there's so much happening here. Again, it's 145 minutes, long movie, well over 2 hours. And we go from like, we have this government secrecy thing, this extraterrestrial contact thing. We have the religious stuff. We have all the media narratives. We have the individual traumas of these characters. And like, some of this can be very thrilling because as a movie, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? But then there are other times when like the contrivances start to take away from the depth a little bit where I'm like, okay, what am I really watching here? So even though the movie's like, it's a plus in some ways because like the movie's very propulsive, right? But then in other senses, you could say, but also it's a little overextended. Like it's constantly moving, but it's not always deepening what's happening with the exception of some very key scenes. So not saying I totally agree with that criticism, but I do think it's valid. And I do think there were times I was feeling.
Yeah, I mean, there's like little things like any film I could poke at. And I feel like, it kind of goes against natural logic. And I've said before, I thought the movie is pretty overstuffed and has probably more ideas than it knows what to do with. But at the end of the day, especially nowadays, I think that's more admirable than not. Like, I'd rather a film go big and do a lot than do too little. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, as you mentioned, like there's a moment towards the end, and maybe just because the movie's so busy and there's so much going on that like a character comes back into the fold with like a source of like a MacGuffin of some sort, and rather than be like, oh yes, they brought it, I'm like, where did you come from? You weren't here before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of that. But again, it just depends on how willing you are to overlook it, based on, like all movies. I mean, we always do this in terms of like, yeah, but I don't care. I love it. One complaint I've seen, I don't really agree with this one, but I have seen some people say that, the movie is more fascinated with like the build up toward the disclosure than the actual disclosure and its aftermath. And that we have all this stuff around, like all this suspenseful stuff around what's going to happen once the central truth becomes public. But then it doesn't really delve that much into the consequences and the aftermath of it and what is going to happen next. And I'm like, well, yeah. That's the movie. And I think the tension is that that's the movie some people were expecting. They were expecting the movie to be about what happens after Disclosure Day. This is a movie about before Disclosure Day. And so there's a little bit of a like, well, okay, but that's not what this movie's trying to be. If you want that movie, give Spielberg a budget and maybe he'll make it. I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't really like, that'd be like going into Jurassic Park and being like, well, I thought the dinosaurs were going to wreak havoc in Miami. It's like, well, that's not really what
even
this
more
is.
Plausible. Like, oh, I thought it was going to be about the park being open, which is like, well, no.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, it's
that's
like, yeah.
the point.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if they make Disclosure World, that will happen.
Disclosure World. I love it.
But yeah, no, I that didn't bother me because again, yeah, I think it's a movie that's reckoning with these big questions, and to try to cheapen it with some answers is kind of going against what I think it's intending to do. It's leaving those answers to the public because it's like it's not being like this is what's going to happen. It's like this is what I hope happens, and we'll see if people respond to it.
Yeah. And then the only other thing that I thought I've seen a lot of in terms of, I don't even want to call it backlash, but some of the things people have said about this movie that again, I don't really agree with this, but like people have been complaining about the sentimentality of the movie. And I'm not calling people out on very purposely here. Because I don't want to draw negative attention to people who don't deserve it. But I think it has a lot to do with the ending. And while, we're not here to really spoil the ending, but obviously like we're talking about it in kind of loose threads. But I do think the ending has divided a lot of people because the emotional climax, and you've touched on this a bit, it is Spielberg at his most sincere and moving in terms of like the mode he likes to be in, right? And like a lot of people do see that as a good thing. Like you and I will see that as a good thing. I think you and I like that mode of Spielberg. Other people don't. I think other people feel like it feels manufactured, that it feels like it's trying to create this collective catharsis through a bunch of like cheap swelling emotion and generalized statements about humanity. And I do want to point out, go ahead.
Just, it's like, I mean, if people don't like it, it's fine, but that's like going into Transformers 4 and expecting My Dinner with Andre.
Well,
Like,
well, that's the thing. I do want to bring up David Sims from The Atlantic, and I recommend if you want an even deeper dive into the movie, I think the Blank Check podcast, it's such a great episode on this, where they talked about the movie, and I think that they had a great conversation about it. I think it was really fun. But like even David Sims, who like really liked the movie, like he did kind of openly acknowledge that like, yeah, like the conclusion does kind of like represent like all the complaints people have been making about Spielberg's sentimentality over the years. But his argument is like it works anyway, right? Like you just kind of surrender yourself to the Spielberg's emotional crescendo where you don't. Like it's your choice, I guess. Like you're either going to or you're not. You can't, and if you don't, that's okay. But it is a very specific thing that works for some people and doesn't work for others. There's not like an intellectual like argument to be made for it. It's like, well, you're wrong because of this. It's like, no, you just didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why The Fabelmans is and will hopefully prove to be one of Spielberg's best films is that he really reckons with that for the first and maybe only time in his career by having, his audience or his character surrogate be like, why do I do this? Why is this integral? Is this wrong or anything? So he's wrestled with that. And I think this movie is also a fairly personal exploration for him. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, Spielberg has his mode. He's, senior citizen. He's a guy who's been making movies for the bulk of his life. He's not probably going to make a wild swing into, stone-faced nihilism at this point. And yeah, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, it is very simply just a matter of like, you're with it or you're not. I think ultimately, if you get swept into the majesty of it, it will work for you. If it doesn't, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, that at the end of the day, it's Spielberg being Spielberg.
And for what it's worth, like we're a bit over time, so we don't have the opportunity to really go through friends of the show and what they thought. But I mean, across the board, I saw great notices from friends of the show. Matt Serafini, for example, Isaac Feldberg, Corey Woodruff, like a lot of our friends, and Stasik too. We're really into this. Charlie Ridgely was into this. There were a few people who were maybe like 3 stars, like Corey Everett gave it 3 stars, and there's somebody else. I'm forgetting who, but Abiel Chessie, one of our OGs. She
sounds like a good party
to
me.
Huh?
I said all the folks that like it sounds like a good party to me. We're gonna have fun.
Yeah, we're having fun. It's like, okay, well, not everybody could make it, but we'll see at the next Spielberg, right? That's usually how it goes. So, yeah, I think that's for the most part. I think this movie is pretty successful in terms of like what it's trying to do. Didn't work for everybody, but it sounds like I'm happy to hear. Well, it sounds like once again Spielberg just like spoke to you in a way that I guess I shouldn't be that surprised because you were more into the Fabelmans than I was, and I remember the reasons you had for that do kind of echo here, to be honest. So that's really cool to see. But that's it. Did you have any final thoughts on Disclosure Day or anything else that we didn't get to?
Who would have thought one of our best working filmmakers would make a good film?
Yeah, what a surprise. Well, I mean, I think there's something to be said about how like people kind of view Spielberg as over the hill, and they kind of treat him a little bit of like a Rocky Balboa in terms of like, well, your best movies are behind you, and you're just kind of making stuff out of obligation, it seems, when I don't think that that's really the case. I think he still wants to make the movies he wants to make. Disclosure Day is a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, they can come to a different party then. We're having fun over here.
Yeah. Well, we're all invited to the Furious party. I don't think anyone's going to skip that one. All right. Well, we're way over time, but thank you so much for sticking with us, and thank you so much for listening to Thank God for Movies. We'll try not to have as big a break for the next one. Hopefully, we'll get to Odyssey sooner rather than later. I think that's going to be an interesting review, no matter how it turns out. But thank you, as always, for listening. We'll be back in the next one. From the Internet California, I am John Negroni.
And from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Wes.
See you next time.